Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history of Wadsworth for posterity. I'm Caesar Carino, your host, and today we have a special guest whom everyone in Wadsworth probably knows, Charles Chapman. Charles was a principal in Wadsworth for a long time. He's now retired, and we're going to find out about Charles the boy, Charles the man, Charles the principal, and maybe even the prenatal child. We're not really positive. How about starting with where you were born, when you were born, and all those kinds of things, Charles?
Well, way back in 1930.
1930.
I was born in Barberton, Ohio.
Barberton.
Near where the PPG building is. I was born in the home, delivered in the home.
So we all were at that
as
time.
we were in those days, and that house is no longer standing anymore. It's gone. And we started out living in Barberton, where my dad worked. And then back in the late 30s, we decided to move to the country where we had a little room. So we moved to Norton Center, which was the country at that time.
And where did you live in Norton Center?
Well, we lived on a street called Grenfall Road.
Grenfall Road.
Between Loyal Oak and Norton. Mm-hmm. And had just a little house on a little farm. Mm-hmm. So we could raise some of our own produce and raise beef and pigs, and it was a pretty neat experience.
And then you went to Norton Schools for a while.
Went to Norton Schools and graduated from Norton Schools.
You graduated from Norton Schools,
and,
but you got to Wadsworth as fast as you could.
Well, I fell in love with a little blonde girl from that sort of operated out of Wadsworth mostly, and so that's how I ended up in Wadsworth.
She operated out of Wadsworth?
Yeah, her family dealt in Wadsworth. My family was oriented to Barberton and Akron, and Marilyn being a Cyberling, her family was oriented to Wadsworth.
Absolutely.
So when I started dating her, my movement was to Wadsworth.
Toward Wadsworth, right.
And then we decided to, when we got married, move to Wadsworth, and that's where we lived then.
Now tell us how you met Marilyn Cyberling.
Well, we were classmates in school.
In school.
Actually, we don't remember too much about it, but we were in the same 4th grade together. Mm-hmm. And then we didn't get hooked up again until in junior high or high school. And we were high school sweethearts all 4 years.
All the way through.
All 4 years, and
you got married.
And we got married.
Did you get married right out of high school?
We graduated in 1948, and we didn't get married to 1950. 1951.
So a couple of 2 or 3 years later. Yeah. Tell us which Cyberling. Now there are about 7 Cyberling families all on a row down there. Tell us the relationships of the Cyberling families.
Well, the Ernest Cyberling was one who ran Willowbrook Dairy.
Right.
And Marilyn...
He had 5 children.
He had 5 children, and...
1 boy and 4 girls.
All girls except the boy. And at the present time, they're scattered all over the United States.
Right.
Not very many of them live in Ohio anymore. And my wife's father was Lauren Cyberling, and he and his brother Francis ran the C.E. Cyberling Dairy.
That's right.
So they had 2 dairies side by side.
Where was the C.E. Cyberling Dairy?
Well, it was right there on Greenwich Road, right next to Willowbrook Dairy, the location of it.
And probably, what, a half mile east of County Line Road on the south side of the road?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm. And they ran 2 dairies out of that same area. Mm-hmm. It was sort of interesting. But
and the Cyberling Dairy sold... Willowbrook and Cyberling Dairy both sold to Wadsworth Schools for many years.
Yes, right.
I remember them. As a matter of fact, Johnny Haynes used to drive for Willowbrook Dairy.
Right.
And of course, Johnny Haynes is now 89 years old, something like that. He still lives in Wadsworth. The dairy, Lauren Cyberling and Francis Cyberling were brothers.
Yes.
But they were cousins of Ernie Cyberling.
No, they were brothers of Ernie Cyberling. They were all brothers.
I'm sorry, yes. Mm-hmm. Ernie, Lauren, and Francis were brothers, right. So there were 3 brothers who had 2 different dairies.
Right.
Ernie Cyberling had 1 dairy, which was Willowbrook Dairy.
Right.
Which is no longer there anymore.
That's right.
And then Lauren and Francis had
C.E. Cyberling.
C.E. Cyberling Dairy. Mm-hmm. Now, why do they call it the C.E. Cyberling Dairy? Because neither one of those 2 starts with a C.
Well, their father
was Carmen. Carmen Cyberling, right.
And that's how it started.
And he lived just 1 house west of Ernie Cyberling, is that correct?
Yes.
Well, one house west of Ernie Seibling.
So there was Willowbrook Dairy where Ernie lived, and then
The
Carmen
house.
Seibling, big farmhouse, and then Lauren Seibling lived in the next little house.
The next little house, right. And Lauren Seibling is Joanne's father.
Francis Seibling is Joanne's
Sorry.
father. That's right.
Francis Seibling is Joanne's father. And what other siblings are in Joanne's?
Joanne was the only child.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Your wife.
Marilyn.
Marilyn.
Marilyn is my wife.
Yeah, Marilyn's wife is Lauren.
Marilyn's father is Lauren.
Lauren. And Lauren had how many children?
Lauren had 3 daughters.
And they are?
They are Marilyn, which is my wife,
Right.
Patricia,
and
Sandra.
Sandra, okay. Those 3.
Those 3.
And those 3 Seiberlings now constitute 3 of the Seiberlings on that road. How about giving us the other Seiberlings, and then I will make a connection between the Seiberlings here in Wadsworth and those.
Okay.
So let's go down the road there, and let's go down to Francis, then let's go to,
Well, it'd be Charlie Seibling lives there now.
on the other side of the road there.
On the other side of the
On
road,
side
right.
of the road.
Yes. Actually, there are no Seiberlings on the south side of the road anymore.
But there were.
There were.
Yeah, Walter
Right.
Seibling.
Walter Seibling was across Hametown Road.
On the big farm down there.
The big farm there.
So we had Walter, then Francis, Ernie, Carmen,
And Lauren.
and Lauren on the south
On the
side of the
south
road.
side.
And on the north side of the road,
Right.
we had Ellis
Ellis.
Seiberling.
Right.
Okay, that takes care of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Right.
Now, they had a sister who lived in Wadsworth, and she died not too terribly long ago. And what was
Well, she had married Teed Abrams,
Pete Abrams?
who ran the IGA store
That's right.
downtown.
And what was her first name?
Mercy. Mercy, I can't think of her name right now.
It'll come to me in a
I
second.
hope it'll come up here.
Yeah, and I know it
yeah.
too, but it'll come to me. Now, their
I'm embarrassed.
other sister married what? Young in Wadsworth.
Actually, none of them married a Young. None of that Seibling group married any Youngs.
Bertha Seiberling
Well, Bertha Seibling.
was Ernie's sister.
No, Bertha wasn't a sister. She married. Let's see, where did
Irv Young.
Irv Young? Right, she married Irv Young. I can't think what Bertha's. I can't place where Bertha came from. Darn it.
I thought that she was Ernie's sister.
No, she wasn't Ernie's sister. She was from another group, but they were still all together. But
Could it
she
be
wasn't-
Ernie's father's sister?
Well, perhaps.
We'll find out.
Yes, it was. That's right. It was Carmen's sister.
Carmen's sister.
Right.
Okay, so
I don't know why I didn't realize that.
Carmen Seiberling's sister, Bertha,
Right.
married E.J. Young,
E.J. Young.
the progenitor of the Ohio companies in Wadsworth.
Right.
So you are really tied into
Yes.
all of those people
Right.
in Wadsworth.
Right. And we still have contact with Howard Young some.
And Howard Young is the son of Bertha and E.J.
Right.
And he lives in
He lives in either Virginia or
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
In North Carolina. Yeah. So we can establish the relationships
Right,
here.
yeah.
So you actually are part of one of Wadsworth's most prominent families.
Yeah, that's why I married Marilyn, too, because
So you want to become prominent.
right. I mean, they had the Cyberling Rubber Company. I figured I'd have tires for life
Yeah.
that way, and never have to buy any. But
And Stan Hewitt Hall.
And Stan Hewitt Hall,
All those
so-
other kinds of things. So you're
we in fact, there's a Cyberling reunion planned in July of 2006, and at Stan Hewitt, and we're invited to that. And so are all of Ernie's surviving children, and some of the other, well, there'd be Cyberlings from Akron and Barberton from all around to be invited to that at Stan Hewitt in July of 2006.
2006, right.
So they're still involved and active. It's been
Well,
pretty neat.
most of them are still living. They all have a long life.
Yes, they do.
I think that Ernie lived to be in his 90s.
Yes, he did.
Carm lived to be in his 90s.
Yes.
I think that Walter, the old Walter, not Junior, but
Right.
old
Walter lived.
lived to be in his way up there. So they're
Right.
long-lived people. That's
Yes.
wonderful. Now that establishes your presence here in Wadsworth with respect to the relationship to the Seiberling families, and we have that taken care of. Now we want to find out about Chuck Chapman, the person who made a life of his own and became very prominent in Wadsworth. And tell us what you did after you got married.
Well, actually,
Well, let's start with high school. You start with high school. You graduated in 1948. What was happening in the world in 1948?
well, at that point in time, I was very fortunate and had a teacher who took some interest in me and got me a scholarship at Kent State University
Who
so
was
I could
that
go to
teacher?
college. Her name was Elsie Brooks.
Elsie
She was a
Brooks.
music teacher. And she and her husband actually took me to Kent and got me a scholarship and got me a room, got me started going to school, or I would have never gone to college.
Entirely possible.
She just passed away in the last year, and I've kept track of her often because she was very instrumental in my career. But so then after, in those days, after you had 2 years of college, you could
teach.
begin teaching. So at the age of 20, I started teaching at Sherman School in 5th grade, in the 2nd floor, southwest corner. And then that's a place where apparently you followed my footsteps a little
I
bit
did, 2 years later.
So I taught there a year, and then it looks like I was going to get drafted into the Korean War. So I was trying to go back to school to finish my degree. And at that point then I did get drafted into the service. And after 2 years I came back and started teaching at Wadsworth. And at 5th grade at Franklin School. And I had the pleasure of working with Mr. Ray Holcomb, who took me under his wing and really guided me as a new teacher to get started. So my career really started there. I'd like to have continued at Norton, but it just worked out that things worked with Wadsworth real well.
And Wadsworth is certainly pleased that you chose here, even though I followed you at Sherman. Actually became principal of that building, and then throughout that entire 13 years that I was there, I was always compared to Charles Chapman. So I'm pleased not to have that comparison now, but it certainly was a good symbol for me to follow, and I appreciated that. Tell us who some of the other teachers were when you were teaching at Franklin in 1954 or 50.
Well, actually, yes, I started in 54.
Right.
And we had, at that point in time, there were quite a few teachers who had been there for a long time.
And who were some of those teachers?
Well, we had people like Ruth Spangler.
Right.
A legendary gal who taught 1st grade was Florence Hanna, who was one of the gals who, when she graduated from school at her time in life, when she was 17 and one of the best students, so at that point in time you could become a teacher.
And she had been teaching there for some 30 or 40 years by then.
Yes, she'd been there a long time.
Started in the 20s, as I remember.
And she just recently passed away in the last year or so.
She was very old. I've forgotten how old she was, but I know that she was very old.
She really lived a good long life. Nora Strons was sort of a New York
transplant,
and she was pretty legendary down there too.
She had a large family here in town.
Yes, she did.
As a matter of fact, there's no one left in town, but Mike Strons would be about 75 years old, 74, 75 years old now. And
now I thought one of the daughters might still live here.
Hallowell. I think that she's gone.
Is that right? It might be.
And if I'm wrong, I'll get corrected.
Yes,
no
right.
problem.
We both will.
That's wonderful. That's what this program is all about. We're trying to establish names and dates and places and things like that. And if we're wrong, no problem. Just call us and tell us and we'll correct it, because this is not a finished product. What we're doing here is gathering data for the people who will be writing the history for the 200th anniversary, which of course is 2014. Now, Chuck, you and I probably won't be around, but we might.
We might.
We might, and never can tell. But nonetheless, we want to make sure that we make our contribution. And today you're helping to make a contribution because we haven't had, to my knowledge, we haven't had anyone who actually was a teacher in Franklin School 50 years ago on the program. We have had Ray Holcomb, but he was the principal at the time.
Right.
Tell us some of the other teachers down there and some of the outstanding students who went through you and are now very famous.
Okay, well, one of the teachers who's still alive yet today and extremely active in the Medina community particularly is a music teacher by the name of Alice Chester.
Alice Chester.
And she was
Alice Hartman.
Alice Hartman, right? She was just fantastic lady, and still is today. It's I have the opportunity to work with her yet, and just was a wonderful person.
I've known Alice for 50 years. I have never known her to look any different from what she does right now.
Yes.
And she has to be up in years.
Yes.
Do you have any idea how old you think?
No, I know that, I know I'm 75, and she's older than I am, so I know that puts her, it's got to be up to 80 anyway.
Oh, I'm sure beyond that.
Or that.
Because she was, well, I guess she was older when we were younger.
She is one who is so amazing too, because she still remembers like all the families and all the siblings in the families, much as you do. She reminds me a lot when I talk with her about how good your memory is about remembering families and how they link together. She just does a super job that way.
She is remarkable. Yeah. I see her at funeral homes all the time.
Oh, yes.
She goes to everybody's funeral.
She doesn't miss a one.
Who are some of the other ones down there?
Well, I was trying to think of the kindergarten teacher's name. She was quite a fascinating gal too, and little short lady.
Wells.
And no, it wasn't that. Darn, I can't think of her name. There's Jenny Harpster was one of our teachers too, who was a kindergarten teacher and did real well too. And I had I can't think of that kindergarten teacher's name. I should have tried to make a couple notes before I come up here about that. But people like Alice Chester and Florence Hanna and Ruth Spangler were really the root of the foundation down there.
How about the kids? Anybody make it
well,
really well?
A lovely young lady who, last I knew, lives in New England area, was Carolyn Fraze.
Okay.
And she was a very outstanding young lady. Another one who just recently passed away, had MS in her adult life, was Pamela Young. Mm-hmm. And Pamela was an exemplary person. She, in her life, lived it very fully and very thoroughly, and she was widely respected. I still have contact with her husband, who graduated from Wadsworth schools too. And
who would that be?
Well, wrestling. I meet with him. I see him once a week. He lived right next door to where Merrill and I lived. They're Scottish people. Rod Lonier's nephew. And mercy sakes, I see him.
They'll come to you in a couple minutes.
I hope so.
And just blurt it out.
Yeah. Okay.
We don't need to apologize to one another. We're the same age.
Well, if I didn't see him every week, it'd be different. But I do see him on a weekly basis, right. And it's been a great thing. You know, it's I think the way you and I have been in the business all these years, which was wonderful. The greatest joy I get out of it is meeting these young adults whom we were related with back in the education process, and see how successful they're doing and how they're getting along. It just makes you feel so good.
Yes, I had some hand surgery not too long ago, and a young boy whom I remember being born is the one who performed the hand surgery. So, we are so pleased that they do so well, because they're saving our lives now, and
right.
we hope that what we gave them in leadership qualities, they'll be able to fulfill.
Yeah.
Let's go from...
Let me just,
oh, I'm sorry, go
I
ahead,
thought of
please.
the name, Stuart Brock.
Okay.
And I don't know, you might have known his father. They lived right on Maple Street, right downtown, and he was a real Scottish person.
The Brocks I know, yes.
Yes, okay.
I didn't know
And
some of the children I don't know particularly.
Stu then married Pam, and they had a great, beautiful life. And,
They were related to Rod Lonier's wife.
yes,
I think she was a Scottish war bride.
yes,
I can't think of her name right this very second, but I know it too.
right.
But then Rod Lonier had a daughter as well.
Now, I didn't realize Rod's family. I knew Rod, but I didn't know his family
He
real
had
well.
one daughter and his wife, and
But
I cannot think of it right
we
now.
lived right next door to the Brocks for, about 2 or 3 years of our married life, and that was a real nice experience. We lived right on Maple Street at that time,
On Maple, right next door to
Where the-
City Hall.
right where the parking lot is now
City Hall.
that the city uses, so
That's right.
that house is long gone.
What, you went to Kent, you started teaching and so forth. Then you got married.
I got married.
And what was your wife doing at the time, or what was Marilyn doing at the
Well,
time?
Marilyn, actually, I married Marilyn so she could put me through school.
Well, that was a good-
She was
well, at
working
least you're admitting it.
Yeah, she was working at the match in the office as a secretary, and so she actually put me through a year and a half of college at Kent.
The old canard, a PhD, you know, Doctor of Philosophy, obviously. There was a team of people called PhDs.
PhD.
Yeah, putting hubby through.
Yeah.
That reminds me of what you just said, you know, that you married her, put her through. I'm sure that isn't the reason you married her, but nonetheless, that did happen. There was a great
Right.
deal of symbiosis with those marriages. And then she was working at the match at the time.
Yes.
Do you remember with whom she worked or for whom she worked down there?
Well, she worked for Mrs. Schaefer, who was, am I thinking the right? Yeah, I am. Who was secretary at the City Hall for
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Lyron.
Thelma
Schaefer.
She was Thelma, three-letter.
Was it
last-
Way?
Way.
Way.
Three letters. I can remember the three
Right.
letters. Way. Her father, Pete Way, was the foreman of the shipping room
Oh, is that right?
at the mat shop. And I worked for Pete for a while. The nicest guy in the world, but rough, but just a heart of gold, just a wonderful person. Thelma, loved her dearly. She was a hard-nosed person, but boy, was she ever efficient. She worked down there until she retired, then she went to the city for 20 more years.
Yes.
And then kept on working.
Yeah, when she came to the city, she was a revelation.
Yeah.
She reorganized
Oh,
Mr.
yeah.
Lyron and
She
and the
organized
city.
everything. She's a great person, Thelma.
But Marilyn worked for her for, I think, 5 years. And at a point in time, when I was in the service, I was stationed in France, and I had an opportunity to have Marilyn join me in France. So she flew over and became a dependent. We lived there for a year before we came back to the States, and that was a real neat experience, and one where I couldn't believe this little farm girl from Wadsworth would get on a plane by herself. In those days, they still had propellers, and fly across the ocean. And
She did it, though.
She did it, and so she was an amazing, courageous young lady. I look back on that, and I think, why in the world would a young lady do a thing like that? But
Well,
she did, and we had a great year over in
you'll do
France.
anything for love.
Yeah,
Exactly what she did. So you were in the service. You got out of the service, came to Franklin School.
Right.
Tell us about your epic climb to where you are presently from the first time that you walked into Franklin School as a fifth grade teacher.
Well, at Franklin School, I was teaching fifth grade, which is, if you and I think perhaps agree that that's the ideal grade to teach with
Oh, yes.
kids. It's just, they're just so wonderful, especially young girls. But I spent about 6 years there, and then I was approached by the school psychologist. They wanted to start a special education
And who
program.
was that school psychologist at that time?
That was a Bill McDougall.
Bill McDougall.
And at that point in time, there wasn't much special education done, and
It didn't start until about
it was
close to 60.
yeah. a little bit later. They didn't read even a department at the state level much.
They call them sunshine classes.
Right. So I left Franklin School and went to Isham School, where another teacher by the name of Doris Brown and myself set up a curriculum to cover from kindergarten through almost high school in the special education program. So we had 2 groups, and we had to develop the curriculum and secure books and everything that needed to be done. So it was a pioneer effort. And Mr. George Meyer was the principal at Isham. He was willing to put up with us and humor us and help coordinate our activities so we could be successful.
So actually you started special ed in Wadsworth.
Actually, we actually started the first special education classes.
And who was the other teacher as well?
Her name was Doris Brown.
Doris
She's
Brown.
now, I can't tell you her current married name, but then she did marry a gentleman by the name of McCrae from Norton. And he's passed away, and she has fortunately been remarried and has a real nice married life wrapping up. But I found that after a year of that I couldn't cope with it. We're taught in the business to have empathy, but not get yourself too tied up in the programs.
Very difficult to do.
It was so magnificent from so powerful, and so many emotional demands that it required that by December I was being treated for an ulcer. So I knew that
that was not for you.
I'd better do something else. So I decided to try to get a job that was more peaceful and quiet. So I applied for a principal's job.
I can't believe that'd be more principal, that'd be more peaceful than teaching special ed, but that's what you did.
So I was very fortunate then in the next year to get a job in Medina as an elementary principal.
At what building?
At the Ella Canavan building.
Ella Canavan.
It was a brand new building. And the reason I ended up like that is I talked to Mr. Burkholder, who was our superintendent, and he'd pretty well advised me that if I wanted to become an administrator, he said, don't wait around for an opening. He said, you've got to go and find it, and then you can perhaps return back to Wadsworth again later. And that was some of the best advice I ever had, because that's what I did. I was fortunate to get this job in Medina at Ella Canavan School, and it was the second year the building had been open, so it was just a tremendous opportunity. And of course, Medina was a great community to work in, because they had all kinds of resources, and they were on the leading edge of a lot of things. It was interesting that Ella Canavan's birthday was the same day as mine, which is September the 4th. So she was still alive at that time, and I was able to identify with her and talk with her. And in about the second or third year I was there, she passed away. And I had the privilege of being a pallbearer for her funeral, along with Vernon Stouffer, who was the frozen food man.
Right.
Some of these guys were in her kindergarten class that she taught in Medina. So it was a real neat experience, and I enjoyed that. And after 4 years there at Ella Canavan, I decided I should strike out new territory, so I did go to Brunswick for a year and worked there at the Towsley building, which now is completely surrounded by shopping and things, and the new high school, which was built many years ago, is in that area too. And then during that time, that year I was at Brunswick, I received a call from Mr. Harold Fix, who was the superintendent of schools here, and he said they're going to have an opening the next year, and would I be interested? Well, wanting to be in Wadsworth originally, I didn't hesitate a bit. I said yes.
Absolutely. What building?
So I came back and became the principal at Lincoln and Overlook. At that point in time, you were assigned 2 buildings, which they're still doing somewhat today.
Now, what year would that have been, Chuck?
That would have been in 1966.
66.
So in 66, I came back to Wadsworth and had Lincoln and, I had Lincoln and Franklin that year. So that was a real nice experience, and having been at Franklin, that I had still some identification there with it, and could so then I each year or so, they would change my assignment from either Lincoln and Franklin or Lincoln and Overlook, but I'd always have two buildings. And that went on for about 8 years. And that was a nice experience. But then an opportunity came that I could be in one building at Isham School. So I was very fortunate to get that opportunity. And I followed Mr. Holcomb in that building, so he had it pretty well set up and a good staff going there. And I finished up most of my career there at Isham School. And we had a tremendous staff and just could do all kinds of things educationally. It's really a good situation. Then in 1980, Mr. Kuhn asked me, who was our current superintendent at that time, asked me if I go
Let's
to...
make sure we get this. We have Harold Fix.
Had Harold Fix.
Stanley Kuhn.
And Stanley Kuhn.
Okay. And Harold Fix is still living as we speak.
Yes.
But Stanley Kuhn is gone.
Stan Kuhn is gone, yeah. But Stan Kuhn was superintendent then, and he asked me if I'd go to Valley View School. And so I did go there for 2 years before I retired.
Now, who was the secretary at...
At Valley View?
No,
at Isham?
No, starting with
Okay.
Lincoln and...
Oh, mercy, okay.
Lincoln and Franklin, and then Lincoln and Overlook. Tell us who the secretaries were.
Well, one lady who stood out in our minds, particularly at Franklin and Overlook, was Virginia Kaiser.
Okay.
And she was, we had, at Franklin, we had a little office like the little building you used to have at Sherman School. Atop all those buildings they built in 1915, they were all square and 4 rooms. And so we had a desk like this, and the secretary was on one end of the desk, and the principal was the other side of the desk, and the classroom was right there too. So it was a really a close proximity situation.
Oh, you bet.
So I did the last year I was at Franklin, we did get permission to take a furnace room in the basement, and we converted that to an office where we actually then had a nice size office and conference room for the teachers, and nice situation.
And who were the secretaries? Could you tell us who they were?
Well, Virginia Kaiser, of course, was there. Another lady who was very helpful at Franklin was a Lois Lee, who's still here in Wadsworth and very active. Of course, Claire Jo Crumley was a real good helper at Isham School.
Clara Jo Griesmer Crumley.
Yes, you got to go Griesmer.
Yeah.
And I'm struggling to think of the lovely lady who was, Trossel was her name, was the secretary at Overlook School. Her husband was a custodian, and she was, Mrs. Trossel was just a lovely lady and always helpful and kind to the kids, and just did a marvelous job.
Now, what about at Isham?
At Isham, I ended up there with Claire Jo Griesmer Crumley and Mary Greiner. Mary Long Greiner. And then there was another young lady who no longer lives in Wadsworth. Her name is Chris Stanley, and she was a great help too.
Yeah.
So we had some tremendous ladies for secretary.
And how about at Overlook, or at Valley View?
Well, at Valley View, we ended up with a lady who was well known in Wadsworth, Evelyn Kindig.
Evelyn Fiskus Kindig.
Evelyn Fiskus Kindig,
right. And of course, she's gone too.
Right. She retired shortly after I retired, and she was a legend in this town. She'd been at the junior high, and then she ended up her career in the elementary school.
Well, she's a Wadsworth native, and her father was a Wadsworth native.
Sure was.
One of the things we try to do is to establish relationships here, not only with sanguinal relationships, but also, within the community relationships. You had mentioned that the custodian's wife was your secretary.
Yes.
I know the answer to this one, and so do you. But for the record, did you have a cook at any of those schools?
Yes, we did. We had a cook in each building.
Okay. Now, who were the cooks?
You're really going to embarrass me now. Mercy. I moved around so darn much. Well, one gal who is really legendary today and is still going great guns was Irene Moeller.
Irene Moeller.
And I hear that she even has a website now with her history and story, and I see where she's been very active in the senior citizens programs in Wadsworth.
Irene Moeller.
Mm-hmm. And she was one of the important persons at Franklin School.
Okay. And what about some of the other ones?
Well, I'm struggling. One of Mr. Holcomb's sisters was a cook at Lincoln School. She lived on Pardee Street, and for the life of me, I can't think of her name right now.
This is what I'm saying, that there were some interrelationships with people, some of the principals, and some were custodians, some were cooks, and so forth and so on.
Well, that was an interesting thing too. When I came back to Wadsworth and was at Franklin, with the help of Mr. Bill Heil, who was the treasurer, and Mr. Fix, I think I really, a couple things I would really do want to mention so people know about those things, and that is, with their guidance, we started a breakfast program at Franklin School that's still, some that's still being continued today, where actually the cooks came in and I was involved some morning. We started out and actually cooked eggs and everything for the kids and had cereal for the kids as a breakfast program. And
the reason for that was that many of them did not get breakfast.
Right. I had one morning where, as we didn't have the program going full tilt, Mrs. Lois Lee, who didn't think really I approved of it, even though I really did, she would bring breakfast food in and take care of some of these little kids on her own, and did a marvelous job that way. And finally I got across to her that it was okay by me to do that, and that was really neat.
Yeah. What about the custodians? Do you remember any custodians in the buildings?
Well, probably the most outstanding guy was the custodian at Franklin School, and John Klein was his name, and he'd been there many a year, and just really was very active in the program. And
did he have any relationships within the school system?
Not too much. He had children that went to school, Franklin School, but aside from that, he didn't really get too involved. Later on, we had Anka Lubinkovich and her husband came to town as displaced persons, and
Anka.
She's still alive in Sweden. I still communicate with her, but she was an outstanding custodian at Franklin and Lincoln both, and she did get involved with the kids. She really got wrapped up with them. Probably a couple of our most outstanding custodians that we worked with was a fellow by the name of Glenn Kaufman, whether you ever ran into Glenn or not, and Francis Seibling. They were retired dairymen, both of them, and the impact they had on Wadsworth schools, both at the high school and the elementary level, was just unbelievable.
Now tell us the relationship between this Francis Seibling and your wife.
Oh, Francis Seibling was my wife's uncle.
Your uncle, right.
And it was interesting, when we got married, they delivered milk to our house, but we still had to pay for it. We were on the dairy route, and we didn't get free milk.
That's
had
right.
to pay for it. That was just the way it was done in those days, and we were glad to get it, of course. Those were the days when they had Guernsey cows, and the amount of cream on the top of a bottle of milk was really, you could use that to make whipping cream. It just really was unbelievable.
Why don't you address that just for a second? I don't think that people with the past 50 years have seen cream on bottles.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Well, with the type of cows that my wife's father, Lauren, raised, were Guernsey cattle, and their butter fat content was way higher than what the Holsteins are.
And what did it look like when the cream?
Well, the cream would be more yellowish, and
where did it coagulate?
it would collect at the top of the bottle, probably about
2 or 3 inches.
2 or 3 inches. And they even make a little dipper that you could, a real tiny dipper, you could dip down in the milk bottle and lift the cream out so you could put it in another container to use it.
Then, but what would be left would be skim milk.
Right.
But if you wanted to use that milk before that was pasteurized, homogenized, or whatever, you'd have to shake it up.
Right.
And plastic containers?
Well, at that time we used all glass bottles.
Glass bottles, round,
Right.
square?
They were square bottles with a tall neck.
And many times there were round bottles
Yes.
as well. Before that, there were milk bottles.
Yeah, that's right. Some of them were round. I think they were all round, come think about it, at that time. They weren't square, they were round. And I should know because I have to wash them in the evenings when Marilyn and I lived with her parents. We'd bottle it, and of course the route that went was at a point in time where people were buying homogenized milk. People that had whole milk like I had trouble selling it, so they were forced then to go to homogenized milk where the cream is mixed into the milk like we have today. You don't see cream separated. It's all.
You almost never see cream as well as the
No.
In fact, I haven't seen cream separated for years and years
No.
and years. Let's get some more about, we're up to the point where you are principal of these 4 or 5 schools. I'm sure that as a community leader, you did more than just teach. You did more than just administer. What else did you do in the city of Wadsworth that made you the prominent person that you are today?
Well, I'd be embarrassed to think that I'm prominent, but I did enjoy my time in Wadsworth, and we tried to get as involved in the community as we could. One thing I really would like to impress too is currently today we have immunization clinics where the health department comes to the community and administers medication to preschool children and young children for mothers. Actually, Mr. Harold Fix should get the credit for that, because when I was at Franklin School and we were starting to get involved before Title I came out in preschool education and working with preschool parents, Mr. Fix knew that at that time that I guess I won't mention the name, our health director in Medina County would require that the parents bring their children to Medina to get their immunization. And Mr. Fix felt that that wasn't really a fair thing for them, because many of them didn't have money to have gasoline and things to get there. So at one point in time, he authorized me to get a school bus and to have the nurses that worked with us go out in the community and find a busload of preschool children, and we would take them to Medina. So we did do that, and the health director at that time was
Leroy Dalheim.
Dr. Dalheim. He was pretty upset about that whole thing, and so that it didn't happen again, that's when he began to set up a program where they go out in the community. So Mr. Harold Fix, because of his efforts and willingness to help, that's why we have immunization in our local community now, where otherwise you'd have had to go to Medina County for that.
And
That was just tremendous.
that's a landmark.
It is.
It's a landmark.
Right.
That evolved then with the health department, where the school system paid a very, very nominal fee for each child, maybe $2 or $3 or something like that.
Yeah.
And that actually stayed for about 40 or 50, well, about 40 years, 35 or 40 years.
Yeah.
And probably 8 or 10 years ago, they tried to up that a little bit. And my heavens, the schools just rebelled horribly against it. So they went on their own and went to private enterprise to do the inoculations. A couple of years later, they came back to the health department. So, something happened here in Wadsworth many years ago that started that whole ball rolling.
Right.
And those are the interesting kinds of things that we would like to hear from a person who is on the inside of the administration. Tell us also, you had mentioned Harold Fix on a couple of occasions. Tell us the the tenor of Harold Fix's administration? I mean, it was not what you call traditional.
No, Mr. Fix was a different type of superintendent to work for. He was so down to earth, and he was a farmer. He was a farmer, and yes, he was. If I would follow his car down the street on the way to school in the morning, if the door would pop open, and what I found, he was chewing tobacco, and he didn't want to spit out the window, he'd spit out under the door. So I knew it was Harold. But he had an eye and a way of approaching things that was not the standard conventional way, but it would get things done. And he was so fair and so considerate of everybody. It was just made it a real joy to work with him. And I felt that we made tremendous strides. And back in that time, actually we developed the first Title I programs, and we started, the people we had developed the curriculums and things for working with these little people that were Head Start and parent training type things.
Give us a very, very quick synopsis of Title I programs, because if people are viewing this 50 years from now, they may not exist.
Well, that's right. I think they're in the verge of being phased out.
That's right, they're being phased out as we speak. Yeah.
Primarily what we tried to do was to get children who we didn't think would be able to cope with the kindergarten programs that were established, and give them some pre-education so they could be prepared, plus the socialization. And then our biggest concern too was the parents, trying to educate the parents. So we had several parent training programs.
So the title, they lasted, what, about 65 to about 35 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
They're on their way out now. However, also they were involved in tutorial work and speech correction and all those other kinds of things. And you had to apply for it. A lot of paperwork, naturally, and all of those other kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Give us a little bit more of an insight on some of the other innovations that Harold Fix presented to Wadsworth.
Well, those things actually we developed and started on our own before the federal government and so on was involved with them. Of course, one of the biggest programs that I was not directly involved with, I sort of was at the beginning of it when we started special education programs, were the work-study programs.
Okay, now that's what I was hoping that you would bring up, the work-study programs, and tell us a little thumbnail sketch about those things as well.
Well, as I was leaving, they did develop that, and what they would try to do would be, we started in elementary a little bit with with what you're trying to do is find work for the kids, and we would even at the elementary level, we'd have the kids work in the cafeteria, sort of, and they'd get a paycheck, and we set up a bank in the classroom and try to teach them how this was going to work. But then at the high school level, they actually had Hank Bates ended up being the teacher who followed sort of my footsteps and got that
Say that name again.
Hank Bates.
Hank Bates.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And he's no longer living anymore, but his wife, Jean, was an elementary teacher at Valley View School at that time. But Hank actually really got the thing going, where we would take the young people in high school level out into the community, secure jobs for them, have them work there and part of the day instead of going to school. And that was just and then of course that expanded through all the school systems. We didn't just start that, but it was a statewide program. It became that. So each school district had work-study coordinators, but we were right on the ground floor of that and really got it started through Harold Fix. I thought one of the things that Harold did that was most astounding to me was he tried to use the resources of the community. The automotive garage that was right downtown, he began to use that for an automotive study place, and he hired some of the people who were the owners and the salesmen.
Name one of
those groups. Well, I was trying to think.
Bob Rohr.
Yeah, Bob Rohr was one, and shoot, the other guy, his son was a teacher in the system. He was very
Camp?
instrumental.
Camp?
No, that doesn't ring a bell.
No, no.
But, and then the other thing that Harold did along that line in the late 70s, particularly, he sought out the community, and he would find people who were either mid-career in their vocations or had retired, and he would hire those people to be our service people. They did the electrician work, they did the plumbing work, they did the custodial work, and these people who had a great work ethic and knew how to work, they were just tremendous impact for us. Al Arnold would be one guy.
Right, he's a carpenter.
We started that house program, building houses and selling them, and that
We
was
still do that today.
and still doing it today. In fact, we were just talking about that yesterday, I believe, about property where the schools were, what they're going to do with the Franklin School property down there. Perhaps that could be a possibility.
We're going to run out of time, but I have to get you to talk about 3 or 4 other things. You are being very modest in your approach to being a very helpful citizen in the city of Wadsworth and a very prominent citizen. Tell us about, and I'll give you, let's start with church, and then I'll go some more.
Well, I'm a Lutheran in the old established Lutheran church downtown, and I have been active in that.
Tell us what you do active for.
Well, I was property chairman for a few years, and I've been vice president of the council. So as property chairman, that's maintaining the building. That was a big job, and at that point in time we bought some of the other houses that surround us so we wouldn't be landlocked, and that was really instrumental.
And what other kind of thing did you do while you were property chairman? Give you a clue, a big window.
Well, the big window, yeah. Actually, we have had to completely refurbish the rose window. That means we had to take it out, and each individual piece of glass had to be taken apart and re-leaded and put back in. In the process, we discovered that the foundation around the window was not solid, so we had to have special stones prepared to have that built. So it was a very expensive project. We're currently in the process of redoing all the windows, because they're all about 100 years old now, not quite, but
Not quite.
approaching that.
In 1915,
Right.
well, you're only about 10 years from it.
Right, so we're close. So all those stained glass windows are having to be redone.
Now, what's the one, oh my heavens, really? About the cost of that window?
Well, I think we were talking about $300 and some thousand.
And how much did the church cost to build from the beginning?
Oh, mercy. It wasn't that much.
No,
No,
the
wasn't that
window
much.
cost more than that.
Yes.
What else do you do in the church?
Well, that's basically it. I sang in the choir for many years.
And you're one of the cantors, one of the leaders?
Yes, I love to,
So you do that?
like you and I both like to sing, and I always love to sing, so.
So you still do that?
Yeah.
What about your involvement in philanthropic organizations in Wadsworth?
Well,
And service organizations?
one of the groups that I felt real proud of being a part of was the fish program.
Okay.
At the very beginning of that, we got that started.
Okay, now tell us about your early days in fish and tell us how that worked.
Well,
Tell us what fish is, first of all.
well, okay, fish is a Christian-based group, not with any faith, but Christian-based to
Without any,
help people.
a lot of faith, but
Yeah,
no
a lot of
particular
faith.
denomination.
Right, to help needy people in the community.
Right.
And so we have over the years helped them with gasoline and food and rent and heat, any needs that they have.
While I was mayor, I called on fish on a weekly basis. As a matter of fact, I had 8 organizations that I called upon, and I tried to rotate them. But I have to tell you that it did not take long for me to be able to say good morning, and without even asking, how much do you want? And all 8 of these organizations were extremely beneficial. Fish was one of those great organizations. And the first persons with whom we worked were whom?
Well, Marion Muckle, whom was just recently honored for her
35
dedication,
years.
35 years,
35 years.
that she and her family were involved in that right from the beginning, from on a grassroots basis. And
what did you do for fish?
Well, I would be involved in just coordinating activities pretty much, and we got the telephones set up in the police department so we could get calls, but just in the formative stage of it, and meeting on the guiding committee that would be involved with it.
And what other organizations are you active in Wadsworth?
Well, that's basically, I deliver Meals on Wheels, my wife and I do.
That's what I'm talking about.
I'm currently, oh yeah, I need to get publicity on that, really, because I'm currently on the board of the Meals on Wheels program.
Tell us about those Meal on Wheels and where you get the money for it and who does the cooking. And
well, we're strictly funded by donations and ourselves and what we get from the meals, which are $3 a day.
If they can afford it.
If they can afford it.
If they can't afford it, it's free.
Well, we have given some, but basically we need to have the funds to keep it going. And it has diminished now. We're down to delivering only 40 meals in the community right now, because there's another program too that competes with us, but we're not competing against them. But we would like to make ourselves more available to more people. So if there are people out there who know someone who could use a hot meal a day,
or need a hot meal.
They
could always use it.
Right.
They need to have it.
Who can't prepare it, saves them a great deal. So
that's right. It's very, very inexpensive. It's extremely nutritious, and you people down there. You work when you say that you work for Meals on Wheels. Tell us what you do.
Well, basically, my wife and I deliver meals twice a month to people who need the meals.
And how many people work for Wheels on Meals?
Well, we have
Meals on Wheels.
Yeah, we have a cook, and then we have that we employ, but everybody else is volunteer. So one of the ladies who's instrumental is Pat Hollow, who is a legendary name now in town too.
Pat Overhauled Hollow.
Right. She and her husband Kenneth, they're very active. They get involved from helping the cook all phases of the program, preparing it and getting it out and getting the volunteers. We right now really need more drivers if we can get them. So I currently am not able physically to drive, but I hope to be able to do that again soon.
Well, you're on the mend.
On the mend, and
right.
let's hope to get better
now,
at that.
Fish, Meals on Wheels, Lutheran Church, Cantor, and all the other kinds of things. Did you ever become involved with anything else in Wadsworth?
No, that's, I've been a member of the Isaac Walt League since 1952, and that's a conservation group. So I still am an active member of that group.
What about the Wadsworth High School Band?
Well, the high school band, we had the pleasure of having 2 children in the band, so for 9 years my wife and I traveled with the band.
And what did you do with the band?
I hauled the uniforms and the band instruments in the school van.
And what about the band contests? Who was in charge of those?
Well, I would be helped organizing them and participate in them. And
I have to push on this stuff. So
well,
I know who the
I had the pleasure of being the announcer for the band.
That's what I was trying to get you to do. The announcer for the band for how many years?
Well, it must have been 9 years.
9 years, and who followed you?
Well, I don't know who followed me. You did, okay.
Same thing that we did at Sherman.
All right.
You were the teacher there, and I followed you, and I was always compared with you. So I've had nothing but being compared with you. We have come, unfortunately, to the end of our program because the time has run out, but it's so interesting, Chuck, and I wanted the people of Wadsworth to know more about the intricacies of this person who developed himself from his own bootstraps to a very, very prominent and well-respected, highly respected citizen of Wadsworth. Thank you once again for being our guest today, and the City of Wadsworth now has you on tape.
Thank you. Enjoyed being here.